Hey guys, welcome to Ben Wrenchin. My name's Ben, and today I'm wrenching on the 02 Ford Ranger. In the last video, I finished up installing sway bar links, and I went ahead and left the wheels off the truck so I could go ahead and install the front shocks on this. I got Bilstein shocks for this truck. I installed some Bilsteins on my Chevy, and I really like these. I've got a set for the rear as well for this truck. I'm going to install those in a separate video, but today I'm going to go ahead and put on these front shocks. So the quickest and easiest way to check your shocks, just push down on the truck, and you should see it bounce and then come right back up and stop. This one takes a couple rocks, but that's not too bad. But what's even worse is this front passenger side. So that one takes maybe 3 or 4 rocks, so I can tell that that one's bad. And what happens is while you're driving, you go over a bump and this thing feels like a boat. So it's not completely shot yet, but it's definitely ready to be replaced. And one of the things I noticed while I was looking at the suspension of this truck is the bushing at the bottom of this shock here. So that rubber bushing is pretty much shot. And so seeing that, coupled with how bad the top bushing looks, I could tell this needed new shocks. And now that I've got the sway bar links installed, I'm ready to do these shocks. I would recommend doing the sway bar links too if you're planning on doing shocks. I'll link that video in the description. But to get this old shock out, I need to take this cover off. So I'm gonna start there. I've got these trim fastener pliers, so I'm gonna try these first. There's a few fasteners at the top of this cover, and these should make those easier to take out. I'm not too worried about breaking these because I've got a kit that has all kinds of trim fasteners in it. But most of the time you can reuse these. And with the cover off, I've got a lot better access to the top of the shock up here. It's got a nut on the top that is pretty rusted. I did spray some PB Blaster in here when I started on the sway bar links, and I really hoped that that would loosen this up a little bit and make it a little bit easier for me. So we'll see what that did. I will go ahead and spray some more in here just because rule number 1 in my garage is you can never use too much PB Blaster. And then I always like to use calipers to measure the size of nuts and bolts so I make sure I get the right size socket. And it looks like it's 9/16, so I'm going to try that first. I can also use this nut and bolt size checker just to double check and make sure I'm right, and I'm getting 9/16 here as well. So unfortunately I don't have a deep 9/16 socket, so I'm going to try to do this with a 9/16 wrench. I don't like using a wrench for things like this, number 1 because it's rusted and my wrenches are 12 point, and number 2 because a deep socket would just be better here. Before I go at it with that, I want to try to clean up this nut a little bit. It's got some goop on it. I can't really tell what it is, but the good news is that has kept it from rusting worse than it could have. So to give myself the best shot of not rounding this off, cleaning it up with a wire brush first is not going to hurt anything. So I think that's about as good as it's going to get. I'll hit it with some PB Blaster one more time. I'm going to make sure this wrench is seated all the way down on that nut as far down as I can get it, and then hopefully I just don't round it off. It's really on there. I'm going to grab another wrench, and I can slide this over the end of this wrench and use it for extra leverage, and that is really on there. So it is just turning that whole shaft. I can see the whole thing moving as I turn it. So I'm not loosening the nut at all, but hopefully it'll break free if I keep going. So that's not working. It's just turning the whole thing. So I'll show you what I can do about that. So with the wheel off and all this just hanging here, all of the weight is pushing down right here. So since that's not enough to get this off, I do have a plan B. The good news is that 9/16 is about the same as 14 millimeters. I can get my deep 14 millimeter socket on here with my longest breaker bar, and that is also just turning this. So I think all I'm doing is chewing up that bushing. I could try putting some heat on it, but I don't want to do that because there's a plastic cover here, some wires, and some other things that I don't want to get heat near. But fortunately, there's enough room under the hood that I can get to that bolt pretty easily from the top. So I've got my 14 millimeter socket on a few extensions. I can get onto it straight enough that I think I'll be able to buzz this off with my impact. I used enough extensions to get up here. I'll put my vice grip pliers around this washer and this bushing, and hopefully that'll give me the leverage I need to get this off. So I don't think that did anything. It did loosen up this washer that was rust welded onto that nut. So the shaft at the top has a flat on it, which means I can probably get a wrench on there. It looks small enough that it's not going to do me much good, but I am going to try that. It's right around 9/32. And fortunately I do have a 9/32 wrench, and that feels a little loose, so I'm going to try a 1/4, and the 1/4" wrench fits on that really well. So I can slide this 9/16 wrench on the nut, grab the top with this 1/4" wrench, and hopefully break this free. It would be nice to have something to brace that 1/4" wrench on, and it looks like all I'm doing there is stripping both of these. I will try to tighten the nut a little bit to maybe loosen up some of that rust, and then I'll try loosening it again, and that is really just not coming off of there. So that's not going to work either. I'm going to try putting a pickle fork in there. I've got a pickle fork I can wedge in there. This is actually a tie rod separator. You can rent these from O'Reilly. But I'll just try to hammer this in underneath that bushing. It'll help to get under that bushing as best I can, and then I'll hammer it in here. I'll go in as far as I can. And then I can pull down on this while I turn this nut. And that looks like it worked. So I'm gonna try that in combination with the impact, and hopefully that'll help me get it out. And I did get it to move doing that because the nut is way higher on there than it was. So I at least know that the nut is loose, but it's still just turning with that shaft. So I'm gonna try to get some pressure on it with this pickle fork. And if that doesn't work, I'll try the 1/4" wrench again. And hopefully I didn't gnarl up the top bad enough to do this. And there we go, I got the nut to turn. So I'm turning it a little bit at a time. I can tighten it back down a little bit to loosen up some of that rust. And the section on the top is pretty gnarled up. So I keep trying to turn this nut by holding the top with the 1/4" wrench and turning the nut as much as I can before it slips. But I am really close. So I'll try a little more PB blaster. I really don't want to cut this off if I don't have to. So I've got enough room now to get my vice grips on the threaded shaft of this bolt. I'll get this on as tight as I can get it. And then hopefully I can tighten this nut a little bit. More PB blaster. Tighten it a little bit more, and then I'll try to loosen it again. And that's just turning the whole thing. I can pull down on these vice grips to try to get a little bit more leverage, but they're not grabbing on tight enough. So part of the problem is my vice grips are worn down pretty bad. If you've got a new set of vice grips, they may clamp on better, but mine have definitely seen better days. But at this point, it looks like the only option is just to cut through this. I almost got there though. I'm gonna go at it just below the nut, that way it kind of gives it a place to rest on. And there we go. That makes quick work of it. There's the nut. And with that off, I can get the rest of these pieces off. And now this is loose, so I'm ready to take off the 2 nuts on the bottom. I'm gonna go ahead and jack this up so I've got more room to work with on the bottom. So underneath the lower control arm are these last 2 nuts. First thing I'm gonna do is brush them off with a wire brush. This should help me get my socket seated on here better, and hopefully have an easier time with these than I did that top one. These are 1/2 inch, and the only 1/2 inch 6-point socket that I have is 1/4 drive. So I'm gonna use a stack of adapters and my battery ratchet. It's a 1/2 inch drive, and those nuts actually come off real easy. So that is good news. There's one, and it's stuck in my socket, but I can just throw it on the ground. And it is really in there. And since that didn't work, I can just thread this back on here. So maybe these nuts are 13mm. It's possible they're just rusted enough that I could get this 1/2 inch socket on them. It is coming off of there though. So I'll just wiggle it for 17 more days and hopefully get it off. Yeah, those gotta be 13mm because this is not coming off. Long pry bar to the rescue. Oh boy, this is silly. There we go. Finally got it off. And as easy as that was to get off, I'm gonna try a 13mm socket on this one. Yeah, and those are real easy to take off. So 13mm works just fine. And now with both of those off, I can take the shock out. So it feels like I can get a pry bar in here. Yeah, I've got enough space there to fit that in. And there we go. So that whole thing came apart, and there's hydraulic fluid on my floor. And I think that's just because I went at it with the impact and ended up taking the whole thing apart. But I did get the shock out, and that hydraulic oil smells terrible. So I'm gonna clean up my tools and clean up this whole mess, and then I'll get the new shock in. Man, this stuff smells really bad. And I ain't kidding. But nothing a little brake cleaner can't take care of. And some dish soap, because why not? All right, that looks pretty good. Let's look at those shocks side by side. When I got the box for this new one, I thought it looked a little big, but then I could tell the shock would slide around in there pretty good, so I think it's gonna be the right size. I don't know, Rock Auto said this was the right one. So these look like exactly the same size. This one obviously looks a lot better. I can't tell if this will rotate, but it looks like it will need to be at more of an angle. I think once I get it in the truck, I can get this lined up on those posts and then just turn this. So I think that'll be okay. It did come with new hardware, which is nice. But the bushing on the bottom end of this shock is definitely what you don't want to see. So that was pretty much shot. Again, I think the whole thing coming apart was me running the impact on it. It's possible that it was busted on the inside, but I think running the impact on that top shaft is what threaded it out of there and let all the hydraulic oil leak out of it. So I'll just make sure this one's tight before I install it. So I know I'll need to get the top end in and get some of this hardware on it as I install it. So I'm gonna start by putting this through the bottom. I'll get some of this hardware on, and then I'll tighten down the 2 nuts at the bottom. Oddly enough, this didn't come with new nuts for the bottom, so I do have to reuse these. but luckily they were in good enough shape. I think I can reuse them. I think it's just weird though that it didn't come with new nuts. I did get a Bilstein sticker though, so that's pretty cool. But this matches up pretty well, so I'm gonna go ahead and install it. Before I do, I wanna try to clean up this area a little bit. I can't tell if it's had an oil leak or if that's actually hydraulic fluid from the old shock, but there is all kinds of oil and grime all over this area. And while that shock's out, I can go ahead and clean this up. All right, and I feel like it at least looks a little better, a little less grimy, and I at least feel a little bit better about it. All right, so now I can get that shock installed. The bushings and caps look the same, and so I know one of these caps will go on here, along with a bushing with the cup side up, and then the other one's gonna go on top with the nut. So to be able to feed it through the bottom, I'm gonna have to jack this up one more time. And then I can slide this through all the way through the top until I can stick it through that hole. I can feel through the top of that hole for the shaft. I can hold on to it from the bottom while I put this bushing on. We'll get this cap on top and then get this nut started. This nut has nylon thread locker on one side, so I'm gonna put that towards the top. I'll thread this on a little bit, and then I can let it hang there while I get the bottom nuts tightened down. And I can blow off this side real quick before I get these nuts on. And then I can just push up on this bottom side and get these nuts started. And I can't push up on it anymore, so I need to let that jack down. And I just let it down a little bit. That way I can see if it's gonna line up. It looks like it lines up fine. So I'm gonna let it down a little at a time just to make sure this lines up right. And now I can get these nuts on further. This bracket is tilted a little bit one way, so you wanna make sure you get that lined up with this before you thread these on. So I will go ahead and tighten these down as much as I can. I'll go slow and do each side equally. And now I can torque these down. Oh, all right, guys, so it is the next day. I took a break because what you just saw is what you think it was. The mounting bolt on the bottom of that shock did snap off. And unfortunately, working on your own vehicles, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when something like that is gonna happen. So my suggestion to you when it does, just take a break. It always helps to sleep on it, and it sure helped me because I came up with a solution for this. So I was able to drill out the rest of that bolt. I am gonna put that in a separate video because you guys might not run into that. But if you do, it's a good way to learn how to fix something like this. The most important thing is just don't panic. There is a solution to every setback. I did have to take the shock back out. It took me almost an hour to get that drilled out, but I did finally get it, and the fix is gonna be stronger than the original bolt was anyway. So after my paint dries, I'll get this shock reinstalled, and then I'll start on the driver's side. Hopefully it's not as bad as this side was. So before I put the shock in, I put the bolt through the top coming down. And from there, I installed this the same way that I did before. I raised it all the way up, got the shock up in here, and then slowly lowered it down after I could get these nuts started. And then just lowered it down slowly a little bit at a time, tightening these up a little bit more. So at this point, I'm gonna do this the right way and snug these down, but I'm not gonna torque them all the way down. And then when I get both installed, I'll drop the truck down onto the wheels and then torque these down to spec. The thing that'll be the most difficult is torquing this down because the bolt head is just spinning as I turn this. And now I've got two different size nuts because this one's a 17 and this original nut that I reused is a 13. So I'll snug both of these down and then I'll get to the top nut and snug that one down too. So without the wheel jacked up, there's enough pressure on this nut to get it to turn. And there's a hex at the top of the shaft on these shocks, and it is a 5mm. So I'll get my wrench on first and then stick my 5mm T-handle in here, and then I can tighten this nut without the shaft moving. And I don't have a 17mm ratcheting wrench, so this is going to be a bit of a slow process. So I'm going to stop there. This bushing's getting a little bit swollen, which means that it's pretty tight. And like I said, I'll finish this up at the end when I get the truck back on the ground. So now I'm ready to start on the driver's side. I'm gonna clean up a little bit, move everything over to that side, and then I'll get started on the driver's side shock. And with the wheels back on the ground, I'm going to tighten all of these to 35 foot-pounds. I found a lot of different torque specs, so I don't know exactly what it's supposed to be. What I don't want to do is snap these bolts. So I went down to 20 foot-pounds. I'm going to see if I can get a click out of that. There we go. So I'm going to leave these bottom ones at 20 foot-pounds. They weren't that tight on there when I got them off, so I think that's going to be good. And same thing over here. I'm going to go for 20, at least on this one. There we go. And last but not least, this 17mm nut may have enough tension on it that I can get a click out of 20. So I'm going to try that, and it is just spinning in there. So I'm going to leave my torque wrench here and see if I can get a wrench on the top of that bolt. And I can actually get a wrench on it through here, so that wasn't too bad. So I'll torque this one down to 20 foot-pounds too. And there we go, they're all torqued down. So while 20 foot-pounds isn't ideal, I didn't find good torque specs. I didn't want to snap the bolts off again, and they were really loose when I took them off. So I'm kind of okay with that. I'll check them again after I drive it for a little bit. The torque spec for these nuts on top is 43. I also saw 35 and 37. So again, not good torque specs online for all these parts. But the good news here is I'm not going to be able to get a torque wrench on here anyway. So I'm just using this T-handle and my 17mm wrench. I'm going to tighten this down until this bushing starts to flatten out. And then I'm going to call that good enough. So there we go. That bushing's starting to move a little bit, so I think it's good. I'm going to stop there. I can go ahead and put this dust cover back on. And do the same for the other side. So drop a comment if you guys know how to torque these down with an actual torque wrench. I'd also like to know what the actual torque specs are, so if anybody knows that, drop it in the comments for everybody else. And we can all learn something today. I've been using charm.li. It's a website that has repair manuals, but I'm coming to find out that it's not 100% accurate. So that one looks pretty good too. I'm going to leave that there. All right, and front shock successfully installed. And last but not least are the sway bar links. I'm going to let that wrench rest against the tire and hopefully get a click at 20 foot-pounds for this. There we go. And same thing over here, except this time I can't rest the wrench on the tire. So I may have to find a creative way to get this to click. If I angle the wrench up instead of down, it'll rest on the frame, and then I'll be able to get a click out of this. There we go. All right, everything's torqued down. And with that, I am done with the front end of this truck. Ran into some difficulties, and I'm not gonna lie, I freaked out a little bit when I snapped that bolt, but I got it taken care of and everything torqued down. It all looks really good. So I am happy with it. Here's a quick look at all the tools that I used. I will link a lot of this in the description. Next, I'm gonna be doing the rear shocks on this truck. Subscribe if you wanna see that. And as always, thanks for watching, guys, and I will catch you in the next video.